The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over the city as Amara Johnson, a black woman in her early 40s, stepped onto the stage of the grand auditorium. The air buzzed with excitement. A palpable energy that seemed to electrify the crowd gathered to witness a historic moment. She had just been elected as the first black prime minister of her country, a milestone that many had deemed impossible just a few years prior. Amara adjusted her blazer, a deep emerald green that complemented her skin tone and gave her an air of confidence. Her short, curly hair framed her face perfectly, and her brown eyes sparkled with determination. As she looked out at the sea of faces, supporters, family, friends, she felt the weight of history on her shoulders. She was not just representing herself. She was a beacon of hope for countless others who had faced discrimination and adversity. Thank you all, she began, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. This victory is not just mine. It belongs to every person who dared to dream of a better future. It belongs to those who fought tirelessly for justice and equality. The crowd erupted into cheers, their enthusiasm echoing off the auditorium walls. Amara felt a swell of pride as she continued her speech, detailing her vision for the future. A future where inclusivity and equality were not mere slogans but fundamental rights. After her speech, Amara was surrounded by supporters, many of whom shared their stories of struggle and resilience. As she listened, she felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever. This was why she had fought so hard to get here. This was why she had endured the late nights, the relentless campaigning, and the personal attacks. But amid the celebration, a nagging thought tugged at her mind. She was acutely aware that not everyone was pleased with her victory. The political landscape was fraught with tension, and as a woman of color in a position of power, she would undoubtedly face challenges that her predecessors had not. Yet, she refused to let fear dictate her actions. As the event came to a close, Amara stepped outside into the cool evening air, the cheers of her supporters still ringing in her ears. She felt elated but also overwhelmed by the responsibility that lay ahead. As she walked towards her car, her thoughts raced with plans for her first day in office and how she could begin to implement the changes she promised. But just as she was about to reach her vehicle, a squad car pulled up beside her. Amara glanced over, a sense of unease creeping in as two police officers exited the vehicle. They looked stern, their expressions unreadable. This was a moment she had never prepared for. "Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions," one of the officers said, his tone brusque. Amara's heart raced. She had always believed in the law and the protection it offered, but now she felt a wave of apprehension wash over her. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, trying to maintain her composure. "You fit the description of a suspect in a robbery reported nearby," he said, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that sent chills down her spine. "What?" Amara replied, incredulous. "I just left a public event, and I'm the newly elected prime minister." The officer scoffed. "We'll need to check your ID. Just step over here, please." Before she could respond, the officers moved closer, their actions aggressive and unyielding. Panic surged through her. This wasn't just an inconvenience. This felt dangerous. The officers closed in on Amara, their intentions growing more aggressive by the second. The glow of the streetlights cast long shadows, and she felt increasingly exposed in the dim light. "I have my ID in my bag," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her stomach. "You don't need to treat me like this." But the officers didn't listen. One officer reached for her bag, yanking it away before she could respond. The other officer began to push her back, his hand firmly gripping her upper arm. Amara's heart raced, pounding against her ribcage as she realized the gravity of the situation. She was a public figure now, but none of that seemed to matter to these men. "Step away from her," a bystander shouted, witnessing the unfolding scene. The crowd from the earlier celebration had begun to thin, but a few faces turned in her direction, concern etched across their features. Amara felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they would intervene. But instead of backing down, the officers escalated their aggression. "This is a police matter. Stay out of it," one officer barked, shoving the bystander back. The situation spiraled, tension thickening the air around them. "Stop! You can't do this," Amara cried out, but her voice was drowned out by the chaos. The officers were relentless, shoving her against the cold metal of the car. Her mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was an outright attack fueled by racial bias. Suddenly, one officer pulled her arm behind her back, and she felt a sharp pain shoot through her shoulder. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed, struggling against his grip. The other officer joined in, pinning her to the car. "Stop resisting," he yelled, but Amara was not resisting. She was simply fighting for her dignity. Panic flooded her system, and she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. As they restrained her, Amara couldn't help but think about everything she had fought for. The sacrifices she made, the late nights, the endless hours campaigning for a chance to serve her country. And now this was how she would be treated? The commotion attracted more attention. People began to gather, their phones out, recording the encounter. "Let her go," someone shouted, but the officers continued their assault. Amara's mind spun as she realized the implications of this moment. If they were willing to treat her like this, if they were willing to disregard her position and humanity, what would this mean for the future of her leadership? She had fought so hard to be here, and now it felt like it was all slipping away. In the chaos, a man stepped forward from the crowd, his expression fierce and determined. "She's the Prime Minister. You can't treat her like this," he yelled, trying to push through the throng of people. The officers glanced at each other, momentarily distracted, but quickly refocused their efforts on Amara. "Shut it down. We don't need any more trouble," one officer shouted, his voice rising above the crowd. He grabbed Amara more forcefully, and she winced at the sudden pain. "Stop! You're hurting her," the man insisted, stepping closer, but the officers were unyielding. Just when Amara thought things couldn't get worse, one of the officers produced a pair of handcuffs. "You're being placed under arrest for resisting arrest," he stated, as if that made any sense. "Resisting arrest? I haven't done anything wrong," Amara protested, her voice rising in desperation. But the officer shrugged as he clicked the cuffs around her wrists, sealing her fate in that moment. "Tell it to the judge," he said coldly. As the handcuffs closed tight, Amara felt the weight of humiliation settle over her. This was not how her story was supposed to begin. She was supposed to inspire change, to lead her country into a new era of progress and unity. Instead, she was being treated like a common criminal in front of a crowd that had once cheered for her. The scene was a blur, voices shouting, people filming, and her own heart racing as the reality of her situation sank in. All she could think was that she needed to escape this nightmare, to find a way to reclaim her dignity and her position. As the officers shoved her into the back of the squad car, Amara felt a wave of anger wash over her. She was determined to fight back, to prove that they couldn't break her spirit. This wasn't just an attack on her. It was an attack on everything she stood for. The door of the squad car slammed shut, sealing Amara inside. The cold metal and cramped space felt suffocating as the vehicle lurched forward. Through the tinted window, she caught a glimpse of the crowd still gathered outside, phones raised, recording the scene unfolding before them. It was surreal. This was the world she was now trapped in, one that seemed to defy logic and justice. Inside the car, the atmosphere was tense. The officers sat in silence, their expressions unreadable as they drove toward the precinct. Amara struggled against the handcuffs, but the more she moved, the more they chafed against her wrists. A mixture of frustration, and despair bubbled within her. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, her voice steady, but the fire in her belly was undeniable. "I am the newly elected Prime Minister of this country. You will regret this." One officer glanced back at her, a smirk creeping across his lips. "And that means what to us?" "You're just another suspect now," he replied dismissively. The car's engine roared as they sped down the dimly lit streets. Amara's mind raced as she replayed the events that had just transpired. How had it come to this? A celebration turned nightmare in the blink of an eye. The thought of her family, her supporters, the people who had believed in her, sent a fresh wave of anger through her. "Let me call my attorney," she insisted, her voice firm. "This is a violation of my rights." The other officer snorted. "You think we care about your rights? You're just another black woman trying to play the system. We know your type," he sneered. Amara's heart sank. It was clear that they were not just enforcing the law. They were indulging in a personal vendetta fueled by racism and bias. But she would not give in to despair. She had faced challenges before, and this was no different. The drive felt endless, and every moment spent in that car felt like a small eternity. As they approached the precinct, the flashing lights and sirens echoed in her ears, a cacophony that drowned out her thoughts. When they finally arrived, the officers roughly pulled her from the car and led her inside. The precinct buzzed with activity, officers bustling about, and the tension in the air was palpable. Amara felt the weight of their stares as they passed, whispers trailing behind her like shadows. This was not just an arrest. It was a spectacle, a chance of those who had long harbored prejudices to revel in their false sense of power. "Get her into processing," one of the officers barked, and Amara was taken to a small room filled with stark fluorescent lights. The smell of disinfectant stung her nose, and she felt a wave of nausea wash over her. "Sit here," the officer commanded, pointing to a metal chair. Amara obeyed, her heart racing as the reality of her situation sank in further. This was more than an arrest. This was a deliberate attempt to undermine her authority and belittle her accomplishments. As she sat there, her mind raced. She had to think clearly. She needed to strategize her next move. Amara had always been a fighter. She had climbed mountains to get to where she was, and she wasn't about to let this moment define her. After what felt like an eternity, a detective entered the room, looking over a clipboard with a bored expression. "Let's get this over with," he muttered, glancing at her. "What's your side of the story?" Amara took a deep breath, her composure returning. "I was attacked without reason. I am the Prime Minister, and I demand to be treated with respect and dignity. You are making a grave mistake." The detective raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "So you say, but right now, it's your word against the officers. You really think anyone will believe you?" She clenched her fists, fighting the urge to lash out. "Believe me or not, the truth will come to light," she replied fiercely. "I won't be silenced." With that, she felt a renewed sense of determination. She would not be a victim in this situation. As the detective continued to scribble notes, Amara plotted her course of action. Meanwhile, outside the precinct, news of her arrest began to spread. Media outlets picked up the story, reporting on the shocking turn of events. Headlines flashed across screens, and social media erupted with outrage. Supporters and advocates took to the streets, demanding justice for the Prime Minister they believed in. Amara knew she had a fight ahead of her, but she also had an army of supporters ready to stand with her. This was more than an attack on one woman. It was a battle against systemic injustice that needed to be fought. As she sat in that small, cold room, Amara felt the weight of history pressing down on her. She was not just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every marginalized voice that had been silenced for too long. The fight was just beginning, and she was ready to lead the charge. As Amara sat in the stark room, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzed above her, amplifying the tension in the air. Time stretched like taffy, each second feeling like an hour as she awaited her fate. The detective returned, his expression more serious this time. He looked her straight in the eye, and for a moment, Amara sensed that he was weighing her words. "You're in a tough spot here," he said, crossing his arms. "If you cooperate, it might make things easier for you. But if you want to fight this, know that we have a lot of evidence against you." Amara's heart raced at the implication. What evidence? All she could think about was the way those officers had treated her. Like she was nothing more than a statistic, a reflection of their biases. "What evidence?" she demanded. "All I did was walk home after a celebration of my victory." The detective smirked, clearly enjoying this power play. "We have your confrontation on video and several witnesses who don't exactly back your story. They claim you were aggressive and confrontational. It doesn't look good." Amara could feel the walls closing in on her. It was infuriating that her words, her status, and her truth were being dismissed so easily. "I was attacked. I was defending myself," she asserted, her voice rising in frustration. "You can't let them frame this narrative. You have to see it for what it is, an abuse of power." Just then, a commotion erupted outside. The sounds of shouting voices and banging fists on the precinct's front door pierced through the sterile walls. Amara's heart leaped. She recognized the voices. Her supporters were here. The realization filled her with hope, reminding her of the strength that lay outside those walls. "Let them in," the detective said curtly, his annoyance apparent. "This isn't a circus." But it was too late. The door swung open, and in marched a small army of advocates, journalists, and familiar faces. Friends and family who had fought alongside her for years. "Amara!" someone shouted, and she felt her spirits lift as they crowded around the precinct's entrance, holding signs demanding justice and transparency. "What's going on in there?" a voice shouted. It was her campaign manager, Malik, his face a mix of concern and anger. "We won't let them get away with this." Inside, Amara felt a surge of adrenaline. She realized that while she was being physically restrained, she was not alone. She had a voice, and it was being amplified by those who cared for her. "Get the media in here," Malik shouted, turning to face the cameras now being set up outside. "This isn't just about Amara. This is about accountability and justice for all." The detective turned back to Amara, his irritation palpable. "This is going to complicate things," he grumbled. "I hope it does," Amara shot back, a fierce determination hardening her resolve. "I will not be a pawn in your game." Moments later, the media stormed in, capturing the chaos and uncertainty of the situation. Microphones were thrust in her face, and questions flew like arrows. "Prime Minister, what do you have to say about the allegations?" one reporter asked. With the cameras rolling, Amara found her voice. "I stand here today as a woman of strength and resilience. I will not be defined by this incident. This is an attack not just on me, but on every citizen who has been subjected to racial profiling and police brutality." Her words reverberated through the precinct, igniting a fire in her supporters. Cheers erupted from the crowd, and she could see their faces lighting up with hope. In that moment, Amara felt a rush of empowerment. She was a leader, and she would lead through this storm. As the media frenzy continued, Amara began to strategize her next move. The detective's eyes flickered with concern as he watched the narrative shift. "We need to get you out of here before this gets any more out of control," he muttered, clearly realizing that the tide was turning against him. But before he could act, the doors of the precinct burst open again. This time, a high-ranking official entered, flanked by aides and security personnel. The room fell silent as everyone turned to face the newcomer. It was her mentor, General McAllister, a formidable woman known for her unwavering commitment to justice. "Where is she?" McAllister demanded, scanning the room until her eyes landed on Amara. "You let her go now." The tension crackled like electricity in the air. The detective hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "Ma'am, we're conducting an investigation." "I don't care what you're investigating," McAllister interrupted, her voice booming. "You have no right to hold her. Let her go now." Amara's heart swelled with gratitude. She felt the support of a sisterhood, a lineage of powerful women who had paved the way for her. The detective's facade crumbled under the weight of McAllister's authority. "Fine," he relented, exasperated. "But this isn't over." As the handcuffs were finally removed, Amara took a deep breath, savoring the feeling of liberation. She stood tall, shoulders back, ready to face whatever came next. The crowd erupted into applause, and the media frenzy shifted into a celebration of resilience. With McAllister by her side, Amara walked out of the precinct, her supporters cheering her on. This was not just a victory for her. It was a step towards dismantling the systemic racism that had long plagued their society. "Thank you," Amara whispered to McAllister, gratitude swelling in her chest. "I don't know what I would have done without you. Remember, you're not just a symbol. You're a movement," McAllister replied, a proud smile on her face. "Now let's take this energy and turn it into action." As Amara stepped into the light, she felt renewed, ready to take on the world. She had faced a storm, and together with her supporters, she would change the course of history. The days following Amara's release from the precinct were a whirlwind of media coverage and public support. She had become a symbol of resilience, her story resonating with countless individuals who had faced similar injustices. The images of her standing strong in front of the precinct, flanked by her supporters and General McAllister, had gone viral. Amara sat in her office, which overlooked the bustling city below. The walls were lined with portraits of leaders who had come before her, each one a reminder of the legacy she was now a part of. As she reviewed her schedule, her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, requests for interviews, messages of support, and offers from advocacy groups wanting to collaborate. "Amara," Malik called, bursting into the office with an energy that matched the mood outside. "You won't believe the numbers. Your approval ratings have skyrocketed since the incident." "Really?" Amara raised her eyebrows, a mix of surprise and hope flooding her. "What are they saying?" "People are rallying around you. They're tired of the status quo, and you're the face of change. We need to capitalize on this momentum," Malik said, his eyes shining with excitement. Amara leaned back in her chair, considering their next steps. "You know, this isn't just about me. It's about the entire system that needs reform. We need to put together a comprehensive plan for police accountability and community engagement." Malik nodded, pulling out a notepad. "Absolutely. Let's outline some initiatives we can propose. We need to be strategic and make sure the narrative stays focused on the issues." They spent hours brainstorming, outlining policies that would hold law enforcement accountable and create more community oversight. As they worked, Amara felt a sense of purpose returning. Each initiative was a step toward change, a way to transform the pain of her experience into a force for good. Just then, a knock on the door interrupted them. It was her press secretary, Ava, looking more serious than usual. "Amara, we need to talk. There's been a significant backlash from the police union since your release. They're calling for a public statement, and they want to discredit your narrative." Amara's heart sank. "Of course they are. They're trying to protect their own." She stood up, pacing the room as she processed the implications. "We need to take control of this narrative. We have to address it head on." Ava agreed. "We can't let them shift the focus away from the real issues at play. You need to hold a press conference and lay out your vision for police reform." "Let's do it," Amara said, determination flooding her veins. "I'll announce the initiatives we've been working on. This is about making our voices heard, not just mine, but everyone who has been affected by this injustice. The press conference was set for the following day. As Amara prepared her speech, she rehearsed in front of the mirror, focusing on her tone and posture. This was her moment to shine, to rally the public behind her cause. The day of the press conference arrived, and Amara stood behind the podium, flanked by her supporters and allies. The cameras clicked incessantly, and the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. She took a deep breath, allowing herself to absorb the weight of the moment. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice steady and strong. "I stand before you not just as your prime minister, but as a woman who has experienced firsthand the injustice and brutality that far too many of us endure." The crowd erupted in applause, and Amara felt a rush of adrenaline. She continued, outlining her vision for police reform, emphasizing community engagement and accountability. "We cannot allow this moment to pass us by. We must transform our pain into action and ensure that no one else experiences what I have." As she spoke, she noticed a few members of the police union in the back, arms crossed, scowling at her. But she refused to let their presence intimidate her. Instead, she leaned into the energy of her supporters, feeding off their enthusiasm. Change is possible, but it requires all of us to be brave and to demand better from those who are sworn to protect us. Together, we can build a future where justice prevails and every citizen is treated with dignity and respect. The applause was deafening, and Amara felt the power of her words resonate through the crowd. She had ignited a fire in their hearts, and together, they would fight for the change they so desperately needed. As the press conference concluded, the excitement in the air was palpable. Amara was surrounded by her supporters, who congratulated her on a powerful speech. Malik beamed with pride, and Ava's eyes sparkled with determination. "Now we take this momentum and turn it into action," Malik said, clasping Amara's shoulder. "We need to get this message out there." Over the next few weeks, Amara and her team worked tirelessly to implement the initiative she had proposed. They held community forums, inviting citizens to share their experiences and provide input on police practices. Amara found herself immersed in discussions, listening intently as people shared their stories of fear and resilience. But as their movement gained traction, the backlash from the police union intensified. They launched a smear campaign against her, questioning her character and accusing her of inciting division. Amara felt the pressure mounting, but she remained steadfast, refusing to let their tactics derail her vision. One evening, as she prepared for another community event, she received a call from General McAllister. "Amara, I heard about the police union's campaign. I want you to know that I stand with you, and I'll be there to support you publicly." "Thank you, General. Your support means the world to me," Amara replied, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Together, we can show them that we won't back down." As the weeks went by, Amara grew more resolute in her mission. The media coverage remained intense, but she learned to navigate the spotlight with grace and confidence. Each public appearance became an opportunity to amplify the voices of those who had been silenced for too long. As Amara continued to build momentum, she received an unexpected call from an investigative journalist named Lisa Harris. Known for her hard-hitting pieces on police corruption, Lisa had been following Amara's journey closely and wanted to discuss an expose that could shake the foundation of the police department. "Amara, I think we have something big here," Lisa said, her voice urgent over the phone. "There's a pattern of misconduct and cover-ups within the department that connects directly to your case. I'd like to share my findings with you." Intrigued, Amara arranged to meet Lisa at a cafe near her office. The moment they sat down, Lisa pulled out a stack of documents. "I've gathered testimonies from several officers who are disillusioned with the system. They're ready to come forward, but they need protection and a guarantee that their voices will be heard." Amara's heart raced as she scanned the papers. This could change everything. If we expose this corruption, we can hold those responsible accountable, Lisa nodded. Exactly. But we need to be careful. The police union is already gunning for you. If they catch wind of this, it could endanger not only your position, but also the officers who are willing to speak out. Amara felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. We'll protect them. Their courage is what this movement needs. We must ensure that their testimonies are safely documented and presented to the public in a way that can't be dismissed. With a plan in place, Amara and Lisa began coordinating their efforts. They established a secure line of communication with the whistleblowing officers and arranged for anonymous interviews. Each step was fraught with tension, but Amara felt a growing sense of determination. Meanwhile, the backlash from the police union escalated. Their campaign against Amara had taken on a life of its own, spreading misinformation through social media and conservative news outlets. They painted her as an anti-police radical, trying to undermine her credibility just as her popularity was soaring. One evening, as Amara prepared for a community forum, she turned on the television to see a news segment featuring the police union spokesperson. Prime Minister Amara is inciting violence against our officers with her rhetoric, he stated, his tone dripping with disdain. Her actions are putting lives at risk and undermining the hard work of our men and women in uniform. Fury boiled within Amara. How dare they twist the truth, she exclaimed to Malik, who sat beside her. This isn't about hate for law enforcement. It's about accountability. Malik nodded, concern etched on his face. We need to address this head-on. If we let their narrative take hold, it could jeopardize everything we've built. That's it. We need to hold a press conference to respond directly to their claims. Amara decided, her resolve hardening. I will not allow them to silence me or the voices of those who have suffered. They quickly organized a press conference, ensuring it would coincide with the community forum. As Amara prepared her remarks, she knew this was not just a response to the police union, but an opportunity to rally her supporters and reaffirm her commitment to justice. The day of the press conference arrived, and Amara stood before a sea of reporters, cameras flashing as she approached the podium. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she steeled herself, drawing strength from the community gathered behind her. Thank you for being here, she began, her voice steady. I want to address the recent statements made by the police union regarding my leadership and the work we're doing for police reform. Their claims are not only misleading but dangerous. The crowd murmured, their anticipation palpable. Amar continued, my commitment is to ensure that our law enforcement is held accountable for their actions. It is vital to understand that calling for reform does not mean we are against the police. We want to see a system that serves and protects all citizens. She paused, scanning the crowd, seeing faces of support and understanding. I invite the police union to join us in constructive dialogue, rather than resorting to fear-mongering. We can create a better system together, one that honors the integrity of those who serve justly. As Amara spoke, she felt a surge of energy. The atmosphere in the room shifted, her words resonating with the crowd. She was not just speaking to the media. She was speaking for every individual who had faced injustice at the hands of those sworn to protect them. Later that evening, as the dust began to settle, Amara received a text from Lisa. The officers are ready to go public. Are you prepared? Amara's heart raced at the thought. Yes, let's do this. They scheduled a press conference for the following week, where the officers would share their stories anonymously. It was a pivotal moment, one that could bring to light the deep-rooted issues within the police department and hold those responsible accountable. As Amara lay in bed that night, she reflected on the whirlwind of events. She felt a mix of hope and anxiety. The stakes had never been higher. Her resolve was stronger than ever. This was about more than her. It was about every individual who had suffered at the hands of a broken system. She would not rest until justice was served. The day of the press conference arrived, filled with anticipation and tension. Amara stood backstage, watching as reporters filed in, the buzz of conversation filling the air. She could feel the weight of what was about to unfold pressing down on her shoulders. This was not just a press conference. It was a reckoning. Lisa arrived with the whistleblowing officers, each looking nervous but resolute. Amara felt a surge of pride for them. They were about to stand up against the very institution that had failed them, risking their careers for the sake of justice. "Are you ready?" Amara asked them, her voice low and encouraging. One of the officers, a black woman in her 30s with short hair and fierce determination in her eyes, nodded. "We're ready. We've waited too long for someone to listen." As they walked onto the stage, Amara took a deep breath and stepped forward to address the crowd. "Thank you all for being here today. We are here to share a vital truth about our police force and the need for accountability within it." The reporters leaned in, their cameras capturing the moment. Amara introduced the officers, explaining the importance of their testimonies. As she spoke, she could see the nervousness in the officers transform into determination. Lisa began the first interview, allowing the officers to share their stories. Each one detailed their experiences witnessing misconduct and the culture of silence that permeated the department. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with the weight of their words. "I witnessed my partner using excessive force on a suspect," the black female officer explained, her voice steady. "When I reported it, I was told to stay quiet. I was threatened with retaliation if I spoke up again. This is not the way policing should work." With each account, the atmosphere shifted. The reporters began to grasp the magnitude of the situation, realizing the depth of the systemic issues within the police force. Amara felt a spark of hope igniting within her. This was the moment they had been waiting for. As the conference progressed, the officers detailed how they had been bullied into submission, forced to ignore crimes committed by their colleagues. The stories were heart-wrenching, yet they conveyed a shared resolve for change. After the press conference, social media exploded with reactions. Hashtags like #JusticeForAll and #PoliceReform began trending, and news outlets picked up the story, amplifying the voices of the whistleblowers. Amara knew they had struck a chord, and momentum was on their side. That evening, Amara sat with Malik, scrolling through her phone as they reviewed the news coverage. "Look at this response," Malik said, excitement evident in his voice. "The public is rallying behind you. The support is overwhelming." Amara felt a rush of gratitude. "It's not just about me, though. This is about every officer who felt powerless. This is about all of us working together for a better future." Yet, amidst a positive response, there were still voices of dissent. The police union released a statement dismissing the officers' claims as baseless accusations from disgruntled employees. They attempted to discredit the whistleblowers, calling into question their credibility. "Look at this," Malik said, showing Amara the union statement. "They're trying to undermine everything we've achieved today." Amara felt a flicker of anger. They can try, but they won't succeed. We have the support of the community, and the truth is on our side. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Amara worked tirelessly to maintain the momentum, holding meetings with community leaders and organizing rallies to advocate for police reform. The energy was infectious, and she felt the city awakening to the need for change. At one such rally, Amara took to the stage, her voice ringing out over the crowd. "We are here today not just to protest, but to demand accountability and transparency from our police department. We deserve a system that protects us, not one that instills fear." The crowd erupted in cheers, their chants echoing through the streets. Amara felt a sense of purpose wash over her. She was no longer just a politician, but a beacon of hope for those who had long been silenced. However, as the movement gained traction, so did the backlash. The police union began orchestrating a campaign against Amara, leveraging their connections to spread misinformation and incite fear. They labeled her as anti-police, framing her as a threat to public safety. Amara and her team prepared for the onslaught, knowing that they had to stay one step ahead. They organized press conferences to counter the union's narrative, ensuring that the truth about police misconduct continued to surface. During one particularly heated press conference, Amara addressed the growing concerns. This isn't about being anti-police. This is about creating a safer community for everyone, officers and civilians alike. We need to hold accountable those who betray the trust of the people they're sworn to protect. The media began to take notice of the police union's aggressive tactics, and the public support for Amara only grew stronger. The tide was turning, and the conversations around police reform were expanding beyond the city limits. But just as things began to look hopeful, Amara received a threatening message. It was an anonymous email, warning her to watch her back and implying that she was in danger. The words sent a chill down her spine, but she refused to be intimidated. "This is just an attempt to scare you," Malik reassured her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've come too far to let them win." "You're right," Amara said, steeling her resolve. "I won't let fear dictate my actions. We have to keep pushing forward." They increased their security measures and maintained a public presence, determined to show that they would not be silenced. Amara was more determined than ever to see this fight through, knowing that the future of her community depended on it. The day finally arrived for the city council meeting, where Amara would present her proposal for police reform. The air was thick with anticipation as she stepped into the hall, flanked by her supporters. The venue was packed with community members, reporters, and city officials, all eager to hear her vision for a safer, more equitable city. As Amara took the podium, she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was not just about her. It was about everyone who had ever felt marginalized or oppressed by those sworn to protect them. She glanced at the crowd, drawing strength from their presence. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice steady. "We are at a crossroads. Our police department must evolve to reflect the community it serves. We need to build a system that prioritizes accountability, transparency, and community trust." Applause erupted in the room, and Amara felt a surge of hope. This was the support she had fought for, the voices of those who had long been silenced. As she outlined her proposal, she emphasized the importance of community involvement in policing and the need for comprehensive training that addressed racial bias and de-escalation techniques. The audience listened intently, nodding in agreement as she shared stories of individuals whose lives had been affected by police misconduct. "Change is not easy," Amara continued, her voice growing more passionate, "but it is necessary. We cannot continue to ignore the issues that have plagued our community for too long. Together, we can create a police force that we can trust and respect." After her presentation, the council members began to discuss her proposal. While some were supportive, others were resistant, fearing the backlash from the police union and their political allies. Tensions ran high as the debate unfolded, with Amara standing firm, defending her vision. As the hours passed, Amara felt the pressure mounting. The opposition raised concerns about funding and the potential impact on public safety, but she countered with data showing that communities with reform-focused police departments had lower crime rates and greater trust among residents. "I understand the concerns," she said, her voice unwavering, "but ignoring the problem will not make it go away. We must invest in solutions that prioritize community safety and accountability over blind loyalty." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the council voted on her proposal. The room held its breath, the silence palpable as the results were announced. A majority voted in favor, and the crowd erupted into cheers. Amara felt tears of joy prick at her eyes. This was a victory for everyone who had ever felt the sting of injustice. That evening, Amara sat with Malik, reflecting on the day's events. "I can't believe we did it," she said, a smile spreading across her face. This is just the beginning, though. We have a lot of work ahead of us. Malik nodded, pride evident in his gaze. You've sparked a movement, Amara. People are finally starting to believe that change is possible. As they discussed the next steps, Amara felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but she was ready to face them head-on. The city was beginning to wake up to the possibilities of reform, and she intended to keep the momentum going. However, the victory was not without its consequences. The police union quickly retaliated, launching a campaign to undermine Amara's leadership. They accused her of being anti-police and claimed her reforms would jeopardize public safety. Amara received numerous threats online, but she refused to back down. She held a press conference, defiantly addressing the accusations. I am not against the police. I am for justice, accountability, and the safety of our communities. We can have a strong police force without sacrificing the rights of the people. Her words resonated with many, and public support surged. The union's attempts to discredit her backfired, and community leaders rallied behind her. The movement gained national attention, drawing in activists and organizations committed to police reform. As the weeks went by, Amara continued to work tirelessly, attending town hall meetings and engaging with the community. She was determined to ensure that the voices of those most affected by policing were heard. During one town hall, a young black man stood up, tears in his eyes as he shared his story of being racially profiled. I want to thank you, Amara. It feels like someone finally cares about us. We need more leaders like you. The room erupted in applause, and Amara felt her heart swell with hope. This was why she had fought so hard, to give a voice to those who had been silenced for too long. As the movement continued to grow, Amara's phone rang one evening. It was Lisa, the officer who had initially come forward with the whistleblowers. Amara, I have something important to discuss. We've been meeting with other departments across the state, and there's a growing interest in implementing your reform model. Really? That's incredible, Amara exclaimed, a smile breaking across her face. We can spread this movement beyond our city, Lisa continued. We need to create a coalition. If we can unite departments, we could make real systemic change. But we have to be cautious. The police union is not going to back down easily. Amara agreed, knowing that they had to be strategic. Let's set up a meeting with community leaders and officers who are interested in reform. We'll discuss the best way to approach this.